Hello, CJ, reporting live from Beaver Creek Precious Metals Conference. I have a great guest today, and Anthony Milewski.
Good enough.
Yeah.
I've been called worse.
I saw him at the gym this morning, and he was at the squat rack, and two things ran through my mind. One, I wish I had better cab genetics, and two, I had to get you on the podcast.
Well, no, thanks for having me. I always look
Yeah,
forward to chatting with you guys and really appreciate having me in here to
yeah.
talk.
I cornered you when you couldn't say no. He was on the treadmill, and you just wanted to get rid of me. So I was like, "You got to be on my podcast." And you're like, "Okay." You are a staple in, I would say, our sector. I think everyone knows you, but for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, can you give us a brief background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So, started off at a fund called Fiber Management in New York. This is forever ago, working for a portfolio manager called James Passon, who at the time was one of the largest investors in the mining sector. And, I really got my start there. And, we saw a lot of really interesting deals over the years, ranging from fluorspar to, blocks in Kenya and offshore North Korea and, gold in Russia. And, from there, I went on to become the head of business development at Paula Investments, which is a Swiss-based private equity fund in the space. And then, I think if you play this game long enough, the objective is to go out and try to do it on your own. And Paula backed me into founding Cobalt 27, and the rest is sort of history. And from there, we raised in equity and debt almost $1 billion in a couple of years. The market turned against us, and the company was ultimately sold. And then from there, we spun out what is now the largest or second largest producer of MHP in the world, Ramu Nickel, into Nickel 28. And I'm currently the CEO of Nickel 28. And I also, on the side, invest my own money.
Very cool. And we're at a precious metals conference right now, but did you have any exposure to precious metals throughout your career, or was it always more on the base
Base
metal
metals.
side?
You know what? I mean, it's not really a precious metals conference anymore. I can tell
Yeah,
you that I have a bunch of meetings for a nickel company, and most of the kind of junior Canadian nickel companies are here. So I know this is a side note, but I actually think this is one of the best conferences annually.
mhm.
I personally look forward to this conference and BMO as two of the premier conferences. Um, but specifically around precious, I have historically invested in precious, but what I found is that you have to change or you die. And
Yeah,
when crypto took off, the gold industry didn't really develop alongside it in terms of the needs of investors. And so everyone today that needs to own gold owns it. Every fund manager, every individual owns it. And what we don't have is incremental demand from retail and punters.
yeah.
And I believe one of those reasons, notwithstanding yield and some of these other factors, I think one of those reasons is that cryptocurrency kind of took the thunder out of gold. And so when I sit here today, walk around and talk with my friends who are running these precious metal companies, I mean, they are severely undervalued, but I don't really see an incremental buyer for that equity until something changes. And so right now, I have almost no
Zero.
exposure, not zero, but almost no exposure to precious. And I don't really follow it closely enough to have specific name exposure. So a lot of the exposure I do have is just through the GDXJ and GDX.
Mm. So how's the sentiment been for you at this conference? Because you have a base metal play, are you getting a very good response, or is it just commodities in general that's depressed right now and everyone is feeling it?
Yeah. So I would say, on the one hand, if you look at the global macro conditions, you have this energy transition underway in all of North America and Europe and China. And that transition, no matter how you want to cut it, because there's different ideas of how it ultimately looks, will consume vast amounts of copper. It
Hmm.
will consume nickel. It's consuming lithium, cobalt. And so I think there's that realization. And so there's a lot of interest in those particular commodities, but that interest is an expression of interest and it's not necessarily people buying the equities. So on the one hand, I think, when you're meeting with investors, people are telling you, yeah, copper looks interesting. On the other hand, I don't really see a demand for equities right now, simply because there aren't fund flows into these investors who look at the space. Generalists are getting really great yield, and so you're competing with this yield, and then just structural changes in the market that we saw after the global financial crisis that prevent hedge funds from allocating to our space because of the liquidity requirements, and the need to be able to sell that stock in a timely manner. And so you had a bunch of these changes that I think are working against the industry today. However, that kind of problematic thing that we're facing today ultimately creates the stage for a bull market, right? So if we have 5 years of underinvestment, then ultimately for base metals, which you need,
Hmm.
we can argue about whether or not you need gold, but you need copper. Like fundamentally, you need that copper, you need that nickel, and if you have 5 or 10 years without any investment or a very minimal investment, like you ultimately set the stage for a bull market.
Okay, so we know that the cure for low prices is low prices. It's a
High prices,
yeah,
high prices.
yeah. It's a very old adage, and you were very like when I spoke to you before. It was you and several business partners looking at nickel, and I think you were very early on that trade, especially when thematically, I think it was based on this green energy revolution that was coming, and I think you positioned yourself in several juniors there, and now you're running your own nickel company. And that's just giving investors maximum exposure to the underlying commodity.
Yeah, that's right. If you look at nickel 28,
Yeah,
we have an interest in the Ramu nickel mine, which
yeah,
is one of the largest producers of MHP in the world, mixed hydroxide product. It's an
yeah.
intermediate nickel.
And why is that so important? Sorry, like why is that specific type of nickel so important?
So each ore body or different types of ore bodies lend themselves to creating different types of nickel products. Whether that's briquettes, and that's a feature of power available and the chemistry and all these different factors, right? And I think in the case of MHP, it's ideal to go into the making of batteries. It can go into anything, but as a form, it's ideal for actually going into batteries. And it's been really a successful product for that. The nickel market itself, though, it's interesting as you ask about it that we saw this really big spike kind of a year and a half ago with this kind of drama around the LME, which wasn't great for the industry. But the Indonesian market or the Chinese groups that have gone into Indonesia have really kind of brought a lot of supply into the nickel market, and I think that's kept a cap on nickel price, even in the face of a pretty big increase in demand.
Yeah, but like a lot of these base metals are driven by the growth of economies, and if an economy is doing well, they're going to need more base
And they're
metals.
proxies for the GDP growth.
Yes, but in the current environment, is that sustainable? Because everyone's talking about recession, 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 and we're not, like the growth and historical growth is not sustainable, and not maybe everyone's excited about this electric car movement or the green energy space, but if these economies are not growing, are people going to need these commodities?
Well, remember, like there's growth. So when you talk about a 5% GDP growth on China,
Yeah.
5% today is astronomically bigger than it was 20 years ago, right? Because there's growth. It's like compounding interest. Like it's the same
Hmm.
basic idea. So I don't think any sophisticated investor would ever believe that China could maintain that GDP growth indefinitely. And that's okay because um, even as that GDP growth declines, it's on a much higher base. So you can have a much smaller number on the same base and have the same demand, right? And so this is what's interesting about the electric vehicle story. So if you agree with me on that and you just are sustaining demand, maybe it's not growing, but you're sustaining demand, and then you have a fully new demand entrant in the form of talking about nickel electric vehicles, then that puts a lot of pressure on the market, right?
Hmm.
And copper is the same way. Copper historically has been the best GDP proxy for commodities
Copper,
investors, right?
copper, right?
Right? Exactly. But once again, same basic idea. Find China's GDP growth shrinks, but it's on this much higher base than a decade ago. And now you have America, Europe, uh, Canada deciding that they need to completely transform their grid to supply electric vehicles. And by the penetration is still sub 5% basically. So that new demand that wasn't factored into anyone's model before maybe 3 or 4 years ago still can transform that commodity in the short term. You also have another factor, which is inflation. So, you have seen in the last 24 months, if you looked at the balance sheet of a bunch of companies, you would see that all of their costs have gone up. Sulfur went from at one point 60 to $600. I mean, just astronomical growth in the costs globally, by the way, not just unique to one area. and you have not seen a commensurate um, shift in the price of most of these underlying commodities. So what does that mean? That means you're having a crushing of the margins. So you're having a shift in the cost curve.
Hmm.
And if what doesn't follow is higher commodity prices, then people go out of business, and you have these new demand entrants talking about, and then you have supply come off, and then you have a real problem. So I think that the shutdowns that happened in COVID, the printing of money and that liquidity
Yeah.
causing this inflation, it's just not really made its way through the commodities sector yet, and we don't really appreciate the implications. But I would have to say that I think you're going to see higher prices just based on inflation because of what it's costing now to produce commodities generally, right?
So if let's say you're making a macro bet on inflation, wouldn't that point back to gold then?
No, because you have a very high interest rate environment.
Yeah.
Like there's no yield on gold.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's like two sides to the argument, and this is you ask any gold bug. If interest rates are going up, you are in an inflationary
How old is that
environment.
gold bug? Is he 67?
Yeah, I guess so.
Find me a 30-year-old gold bug. Right? Like, I mean, this is real. Like, walk around this
Yeah.
conference. Like, I'm the youngest guy here. You're probably you're the youngest guy here, right?
No, I'm
So,
not. I'm a
but
dinosaur.
you're like, I'm making
Just
a joke, but like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
get the point. Like,
yeah. I know.
and this is a problem with the gold industry. You need some 35-year-old men and women in there to sell the story to other young people because we can understand copper, right? Like, it goes into your car, your house.
Yeah,
But gold is more nuanced. Like, and fine, it's been around for thousands of years. I'm not arguing against gold. I'm just saying that sales pitch hasn't been made to this younger generation, and everybody who needs to own it owns it. So unless someone can like turn around and convince these people, even if you're right, gold's not going anywhere. Like they got to find some buyers for it, and they got to tell a story to that audience that resonates.
So do you think this is why a lot of the larger gold producers are pivoting more to base? Not necessarily
Uh,
like, and do you think that's going to be a full transition where
well, my
gold,
experience
yeah,
is everything goes like this on a pendulum, right?
yeah,
So at some moment we'll be in the max hate of gold.
yeah,
Like people will be going bankrupt and merging or whatever will happen, and then for some unforeseeable reason, I wish I could foresee it,
yeah,
it will come slamming back, like with a vengeance. It'll come all the way back, and everyone will be max bullish gold. It's just that is that a decade? Is that a year? Like it's very hard, and I have no insight in particular for gold because it's not as much driven by supply demand imbalance. I mean, we could have a conversation around, you know, China not buying U.S. bonds at the same, Russia buying gold. I mean, we could kind of have that whole argument, but I still think that it's going to come down to um, people who aren't 65 who decide that for whatever reason that they want to own gold and they don't want to go own a corporate bond or an S&P 500 index fund or a new house. I mean, that's really for gold what I think has to happen.
and so to convince the younger generation, like obviously Bitcoin did a great job because it kind of
Yeah.
touched on a lot of the points that they can relate to. If they want, like, let's say I want this younger generation to understand why gold has been so important historically, like who does that or how can that happen?
First, I think you have to like pull it back from crazy time instead of like talking about the end of the U.S. dollar and like
Yeah,
like, where these gold bugs go. I think doesn't resonate with the average person, and so I think you have to have a mainstream message, and probably it has to be as part of your portfolio,
yeah,
something that resonates with people. But talking about the demise of the U.S. dollar and the end of the world, I don't think that
yeah.
resonates with most people, and
That's like the narrative of everyone along the Bible Belt, and they're buying gold with their bullets, and
this just yeah, that
yeah,
doesn't resonate with people want to know how they're going to make money, why it's going to go up, and also this. I think one of the things that I've experienced in my career is, especially at the very beginning, there were truly long-term investors, people who bought this stock and were intending to hold this stock for multiple years. And you cannot convince me otherwise now. Everyone is a short-term. There's no such thing as a long-term investor anymore.
yeah,
I don't even care if it's BlackRock. I mean, none of these
yeah,
people are 5-year holders, right?
hmm,
And so that probably creates a trading mentality, especially in retail. If we look at like Dave Portnoy, that guy from Barstool,
hmm,
and if you recall I just remember like watching him during COVID, and he was throwing darts or something at like these and then he would just buy that stock that day and it would
Yeah.
go up. And I think that trading mentality probably permeated retail. And so it kind of all circles back like, okay, you've convinced me that I should buy gold, but like, why is it going to go up now? How am I going to make money?
Yeah.
So if you shift over to base metals, you can tell a very compelling story. Okay, we are all going to buy electric cars, and there's nickel in each car, or we're going to have to, redo the power grid in America. There's copper, or we're going to stop buying coal. There's uranium. Like you can
Yeah.
tell this compelling story, and you can take a view on when that's going to happen.
Hmm.
With gold, like
That's true.
I don't know what's the story. Like I don't like I could
The-
buy it tomorrow, and I don't see any reason to own it. Right?
yeah.
And I'm not
Like
bearish on gold. I just don't like what's the catalyst? Like what's the reason?
just because there's more, like there is an actual use for these base commodities, you can build a story
Yes.
around
As an
infrastructure, the
as
grid.
a
Yeah.
company, I think, and that story. Then, if you're going to go talk to the retail market, it's very easy. You sit there and say, "Here's global demand for copper today. If China's GDP stays here, U.S. GDP stays here, even goes down to here, here's what it is." And then, by the way, if penetration of EVs goes from X to Y, or this thing to that thing happens, like here's the incremental demand. Like it's so easy to tell that story for each of the base metals in their own unique way, right?
Yeah.
Whereas with gold, I feel like I've never heard that. There's no story like the end of the world isn't a story that I'm going to buy because if I've always said like if I need gold bars at my house, like I actually want to own guns and
Yeah.
farming land, right?
But what about the devaluation of fiat currency and how gold is money?
Well, I want to just buy commodities, a basket of commodities. Then
Yeah.
same
Yeah,
story.
it is.
So all I'm saying is like I'm not a gold bear at all.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons why um, you don't have this interest is because someone hasn't come up with a real clear narrative that resonates with a 35-year-old who has a limited portfolio because we all are limited by whatever that number is. Like, why should I buy gold over this thing? And then this also brings up another point. Until fairly recently, the stock market was doing so incredibly well, owning mega caps with infinite liquidity. Like, why do you want to own that?
Hmm.
And so someone needs to come up, if you're talking specifically to precious, they need to come up with a story. Now, with silver, you can paint a story around, with silver, you could paint a story around, it just escaped me, solar,
Yeah.
right?
There-
So you could hypothetically create that story in a
yeah.
more compelling way. But I don't own any, I'm not involved in any gold projects. So it's not something I think about a lot. But if you ask me why it is where it is, that would be my view.
Interesting. I think, well, it's an echo chamber, right? Especially because we are like, I'm a gold bull, and you bring on other gold bulls, and all of
Tell
a
me, why
sudden,
should I buy gold? Why should I go
well,
buy
I'm
gold?
gonna put on my tinfoil hat and tell you the things that it's not very compelling to you.
But
But
tell me what I'm asking you right now. You're a
well,
gold
I can
bull.
tell you that, like or on a macro level, it looks like fundamentally or historically all the factors that made gold go up: inflation, the overprinting of money, volatility. It's a
You
volatility
reading Ray
hedge.
Dalio stuff these days? I mean, like,
No, like this is in me, like kind of like the CFA textbook too, right? They had a commodity section there, and it's a natural inflation hedge as well, right? But I'm not going to be the one that tells you that I think the world is going to fall apart, and all of a sudden I have like gold in my teeth, and I'm going to knock it out.
I'm just
Gonna buy
you
some
didn't
bread.
tell like I don't
Yeah,
feel the need like you're the gold bull,
yeah.
and I'm just playing devil's advocate with you. Like I'm not trying to be rude, but like I don't feel any more need to buy that gold. But from what you just told me, I don't.
But aren't the reasons like commodity? You say inflation is very good for a commodity. Can we agree on that?
Yeah,
Right? And that's one of the main reasons for gold. But you like the industrial application of what your commodities that you're investing in, and it's an easier narrative to sell to potential investors because we're going to need to redo the grid. It's going to require X
yeah.
amount of metals. We have this amount of metals, and we have to buy this much,
There's
right?
a
Like,
story to sell an equity to
yeah,
like it's very clear story, and that's why you still get these bids from time to time for base metals. I think so. Whereas with gold, like anyhow, that's just my thought. I don't, I'm like I
yeah,
said, I'm not a bear or a bull. I don't really delve into precious too much, other than through index funds, GDX, GDXJ.
yeah.
But that's my feeling about why the sector hasn't really benefited from what is actually a really great gold price. I mean, let's be honest, that's a great gold price.
Yeah, well, you ask any gold investor, they always say wait till gold gets to 2000 and these juniors are finally going to rock and roll again. We hit 2000 and nothing really happened. None of the money spilled over into the stocks, right? But let's say I want to be a base metal investor, wouldn't it be, and using the same, like you make a very compelling narrative, why wouldn't I just buy the metal, like an ETF that gives you
Well,
exposure to,
I think there's much more torque.
yeah,
If I show you the chart of, the leverage, how much more leverage, let me say.
yeah.
If I show you
So it's the same reason why you'd buy a gold stock then.
okay, if you are a gold bull,
Hmm.
if you think the thing is gonna, if I decided for whatever reason, if you convinced me that I needed to own gold, I 100% would go buy either the GDXJ because I'm lazy,
Hmm.
or I would buy a basket of junior companies because the torque is much greater than owning gold. Because what's gold going to do? Going to go to 2,000 to 2,400 when um, that underlying junior company could go from like 15 cents to $3, right? So if you're talking about making money, the torque inside of these juniors is fantastic. In fact, I think one of the ways I look at all these junior companies is options. We're trading options. Like if you're talking about a sub $500 million company, just an options trader,
Yeah,
and the theta, the time decay of the option, that's really just the G&A burn, right? So that's the theta of the option because if you buy an option, like it decays as you get closer to like the
yeah.
time. So it's the
The
same,
expiration,
yes.
right?
So
Yeah,
it's the same idea. And because you're trading an option, you're not trading like Freeport or First Quantum. Like you're trading this option. That's why these stocks can go from nothing to multi-$100 million market caps. And that's how I look at it when I buy a $40 million company. I'm buying an option.
yeah. And I guess it's the same argument if people want that asymmetric gain, you can have it in the base metal explorer,
Yeah.
but at least the fundamentals on why the commodity is attractive
Yeah.
are
And if
more,
you want to be
yeah,
safe, you buy the big boy, right?
yeah,
Whoever that is. And you can't fight the tape. I don't care what anyone says. You can't fight the tape. If it turns out that China's going into a recession with, what's happening in the property market or the US, like you can't fight the tape. It doesn't matter. You have the best project in the world. It's going to be worth less today than it is in a year if the tape's coming against you. And I think that's true for every single metal.
yeah,
And that's part of it, I think. And that comes back to my idea around options trading. So you've bought this copper option, like I bought this one called US Copper. Is this tiny micro cap in California, right? Their burn rate is so low that even if the copper tape doesn't come for 2 years, then that thing can still make it through and go up, right? But
yeah,
you have to be cautious because if your option expires, and by expire I just mean they run out of money
yeah,
at the bottom of the depths of whatever's happening, and they got to raise money, you can get blown out of your option. And so
yeah,
that's how I really think about these things as options. And when I'm buying them, I don't think about like, oh, Bill Smith over here with this $40 million market cap company is going to go build a mine. Like, yeah, best of luck. Like
yeah,
it's not happening here. You need a $2 billion capex. You have a $40 million market cap. Like
yeah.
that's not real.
So you have a high conviction on why certain commodities are going to go up, and you were on the buy side before, and then you moved to issuer side. After, like, what keeps on driving you? Like, I looked at, you're very successful, but you still open yourself up to the public sphere by running these pubcos when you don't necessarily have to. So
Yeah.
what's the internal drive? Like, why do you keep on doing it?
I think it's fun. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by markets,
Hmm.
and um, right now with nickel, we're on the forefront of what's happening with global energy transition. I've also invested pretty heavily in copper and uranium. Once again, I think as we shift from a baseload of coal, this is going to happen over years. The only green energy, truly green, that we have
Yeah,
available today is nuclear, right?
for
Fueled by
sure.
uranium. So I really like thematic investing,
Hmm.
and I'm really fascinated by markets. And so I like to sit there and think about what the future is going to look like, and then backfill that with what commodities are we going to need, what's the timing of that, and sometimes you're wrong and sometimes you're right, or sometimes you're too early. But I think just intellectually that's really interesting to engage in thinking about the world through the lens of commodities, because if you look around this room right now, like everything we see is either mined or grown. They're the basic elements of our modern life. And so engaging in that, investing in that, and being part of that is It's really interesting and fun. And sometimes you win, and as you say, sometimes you get it wrong, and people get pissed off.
Yeah. And sometimes you just have to risk it for the biscuit,
Yeah.
right? So, throughout your career, what would you say, like, what are some good, I guess, lessons that you've learned that you can either relay to potential investors in our space or even someone that wants to run a publicly traded issuer? What kind of
Um,
advice can you give?
I would say so. There's a lot of different things. I think one thing is if you're a CEO, let's see, there's a lot of retail investors.
Hmm.
If you're a retail individual and you're going to invest in the mining space, always do it in a portfolio. Never go all in on black. This is
Yeah.
my experience. You never want to. I'm all my $100,000. I'm going all in on black. Like I just have never. That's never resonated with me. And sure, someone who goes all in on black and they call black, you're a big winner. But I think it's much better for your $100,000 to say, by way of example, I like copper or I like nickel or gold, and then spread your chips around a little bit. And I even think that means uh, don't buy in this example 4 junior companies. Buy Freeport McNamara,
Yeah.
buy Barrick, buy whoever the big guy is, and then buy a couple of juniors.
Yeah.
Or the alternative is to look at it like I'm going to Vegas and here's my 100 grand, and if
Yeah.
I take it to zero, it's not going to impact my life.
Yeah.
And so I think really before you even buy your first stock, it's really kind of thinking about an approach that really works for your personality and it works for your personal financial situation, right? Like I think sometimes people haven't really thought about that. They just kind of get sucked in. But I think that then really helps you through the cycle. Like when you're down, you're like, okay, but that's fine because um, I knew, like it just helps you as opposed to becoming desperate and selling at the wrong time. And so I would just say, especially to the retail investors, and if you're already in it, like look at your portfolio and think about it. Like you probably shouldn't only own one gold stock. You should probably own five. And by the way, what's wrong with owning an index fund? And so it's really having a more holistic approach
Hmm.
to what it is you're trying to achieve as an investor.
Okay. So not including your deals that you've run or are currently running, like what was your greatest investment, would you say?
Win. I mean, there's a lot of winners and losers, but
What was the
I,
greatest win and what was the greatest loss?
so I had a really spectacular trade on the GDX when it blew up during COVID.
Yeah.
I was just there that
So
day.
it's recent.
Yeah, like
Like,
that, but it
yeah.
was just there. I had the liquidity.
Yeah.
I did it in an interactive broker account.
Okay. Nice.
It was just the
Yeah.
stars aligned, and
Was it options on the GDX?
I mean, it wasn't even. It was
You just
just
bought the,
what happened was there was a huge discount. Like I don't know if you saw, it broke down like at the kind of 6 months into COVID.
yeah.
There was a particular day where the 3 times levered fund blew up, and a bunch of things kind of happened in one day, and it was just liquid, and you could go in size, and it was spectacular.
Yeah.
Where I would say I've lost is not selling.
Yeah.
So I can tell you it is where, you never want to fall in love.
Hmm.
And one thing I would tell everyone is you cannot make money if you don't sell.
Yeah.
And this is like a fundamental thing, and people don't sell. And if I look back at like situations where the stocks have gone down, like I'm okay with that. But the ones actually I regret are the ones where I did a private placement with my buddy's thing or this, and then on paper it was for some massive number. I
Yeah.
didn't sell because it was going to go even higher.
Hmm.
And so the ones I regret are the ones I didn't sell. And there's like that saying, I'd rather, how does it go? I'd rather make a small fortune selling too early than lose a large fortune selling too late.
Yeah.
And so those are the ones I regret, are the ones where I was in control and I didn't sell.
Yeah. I've done that.
And every time I have to remind myself of that. As I look at my my bank statement right now, I'm like, could have sold that one. I could have sold that
Yeah.
one.
Shoulda, woulda,
But I
right?
don't regret the single one where I sold it and it went up another 2 times because
Yeah.
you banked it. So that's how I think about it.
Cool. Okay. So you're running a public issuer right now,
I am.
your nickel deal. Can you tell us a little about that and how you're giving maximum exposure to nickel to your investors?
Yeah, so we're nickel 28.
Yeah.
We're one of the largest producers. I mean, until recently, we were the largest producer of MHP in the world. That's type of nickel.
Hmm.
I think now we've been eclipsed by a mine in Indonesia. And, the way that this mine came to be, it's been operating for almost 10 years, is that Highlands Pacific, the predecessor company, developed and brought in MCC as a partner, and then took a loan, construction loan, to build it, and effectively got a carry from MCC, and that loan is being paid back through time, right?
Hmm.
And what's spectacular about this for us is that we're in the tail, 18, 24 months, that's all dependent on the nickel price of the repayment of that loan. And so, right now it's $101 million market cap. I haven't looked at the tick right now. $100 million market cap company. And, if you looked at the cash flow, the current cash flow, so this isn't a projection, this would be like backward looking, you might be looking at a 40-cent dividend if you returned all the cash on a company that's $100 million. And that cash comes to the company when the loan is repaid. So right now, the majority of the cash is being swept out and just the repayment of the loan is happening, right?
Yeah.
But in the not so distant future, that loan is repaid. And then,
So when are you expected to see that loan
it's
being paid off?
still like probably 2 years out.
2 years?
I mean, it's
Yeah.
that is really driven by the nickel price,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Okay.
payabilities have declined for both cobalt and nickel. Because remember, outside of the Congo, basically nickel deposits exist in a 10-to-1 ratio, 10 units of nickel for every 1 unit of cobalt.
Hmm.
So we've seen, cobalt's pricing come off. And just a side note for the retail guys here, when people talk about nickel, you have to talk about payability. So if you're selling nickel metal,
Hmm.
then you can look to a reference price like the LME.
Yeah.
When you're selling an intermediate product, you have a payability, which means your reference price may well still be the LME, but you're actually getting a percentage of the LME. So you're getting like 75% might be a payability, right?
Yeah.
And so that means if nickel's $1 and your payability is 75%, you're getting 75 cents.
Yeah.
And so what we've seen over the last year is a decline in payabilities, a decline in price for nickel and cobalt. And so, that slows down the repayment. But just as fast as it slows it down, it can speed up if you have the price of nickel.
Yeah. So we buy your company obviously because we like nickel.
Yeah.
And when nickel goes up, the debt gets paid down faster, and you
correct.
almost have a double bump because now you're a dividend paying
Yeah,
company,
100%.
which is going to appeal to far more investors. Like that's in
And
your
it's a
mandate.
large dividend relative to the market cap today.
Yeah.
So I own, I think my on a fully diluted basis, I own 10.5% of the company.
Yeah. And
And so, I think the return of capital in its various forms is what I hope happens. I mean,
yeah.
that's what I foresee happening for the company.
So how did you structure this company? Like how did
So
this
so
come up?
this asset. So when I was the chairman and CEO of Cobalt 27,
Okay.
we actually wanted to do a stream on Highland Pacific, but the joint venture uh, doesn't allow you to pledge one of the underlying assets. It just didn't work
Hmm.
effectively. And so what we had ended up doing was acquiring the company. So we purchased Highlands Pacific. And then when we were taken over, we really were trying to defend shareholder value. And, we knew there'd be a shareholder vote. And so what we did was we said, look, we really want to spin out our portfolio of royalties. We have like Dumont, Turnagain, a bunch of great royalties,
Yeah.
and Ramu Nickel. And so we negotiated that, Justin and I, and we were able to pull that out of the company and then put that into it, spin it out as a public company as the balance of the cobalt assets were taken private.
So do you see yourself using that cash in the future to become a consolidator of these base metal streams and royalties, or do
No.
you think you're just going to get taken out at?
Of course, ultimately, that's a decision for the board.
Yeah.
But, you know, my vision would be returning that capital to shareholders.
Yeah.
That would be
Whether it be through
whether it be
dividend
share
or
buyback
yeah.
or dividends. Like that would
Yeah.
be my vision. Obviously, that vision has to be shared by the board and shareholders, but
Yeah.
that would be my vision.
So are you actively looking at other assets right now, or is it just essentially a holdco right now? Like not necessarily a holdco,
No,
but
I
like
mean, we're actively. It's an operating joint venture,
yeah.
so we spend significant amount of time, helping with procurement of sulfur and thinking about selling the nickel and diversifying the book. So a lot of the management of it is actually just operating and dealing with Ramu nickel. So
Yeah.
that's one thing. And then I think the second thing, which takes a lot of my time, Martin and some of the other guys who are in P&G all the time are dealing with that side of it. But I think it's also figuring out a way, if it's possible, to repay that debt early.
Mm.
Because, if you're able to bring that forward, the net present value of those cash flows is potentially greater than it would be by waiting it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Money now is worth more than money in the future, right?
Yeah.
Very cool. So is that the only thing that's occupying your time? Like
Just
what
like
else
in
is?
terms of like professionally, yeah, like this is what I
Yeah.
spend all my time thinking
Yeah.
about. But on the investment side, I'm always looking at new and interesting things to just invest money in. And I think copper for me right now, like I told, like my approach has been to just buy a handful of these copper juniors.
Yeah.
I've told you about U.S. Copper. It's a U.S. asset. Bought one called Freeport. I own some of the big names, and that's purely a passive way of thinking about what is inevitably going to be a copper bull market. Now that might be delayed a bit here with the kind of economic news we're seeing.
Yeah.
So that might be pushed out 12 or 18 months. But the best time to buy is to take less money than you need, whatever that amount is for you, and just go buy $5 million micro cap, knowing full well it might go to zero or you might get
Yeah.
blown out. But that five, like when I think about over the years and these funds I've worked at, some of the big wins is when you own that $5 or $10 million micro cap
Yeah.
and the whole cycle turns.
Yeah.
And then you wake up and literally in a 1 week period, it's 150 million market cap.
Mm-hmm.
And it's highly risky.
Yeah.
And so you should only do that, one, if you have the money, and two, if you have a portfolio of them. But that's how I personally kind of throw some darts around for what I think is a bull market,
Yeah.
acknowledging that it could be further away than I think. And some of these could also be a zero because of theta, like we talked about. Or you go wake up and if just one of them works, it can pay for all the sins, the other sins, right?
Yeah. So you're looking for companies that have enough cash to stay solvent
Yeah.
within that time frame, let's say 12 to 18 months. Yeah.
An example. I'll give you the example. I'll
Yeah.
just full disclosure. I bought 5 or 6% of the company now. U.S. Copper,
Okay.
not on the board, not a director, right? But like what I see is they've got a few $1 million in the bank. They've got a project in the U.S. and they're working through expanding that resource through. I mean, this is just what the management's told me, through like looking at the historic drill holes it operated 100 years ago or 80 years ago. So to me, this is an amazing story because you have this nationalism in America around wanting copper deposits, and the market cap is like $4 million.
But doesn't California as a jurisdiction scare you?
One, in a true bull market, everything trades up.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. You can have like offshore aggregate mining, offshore Ghana. I remember
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
2 cycles ago, right?
Like, was that Nautilus?
Yeah,
They had,
that was,
so yeah.
everything trades out. Two, they have something called vested mining rights that they're working on. So there's a story there for that management team to tell. And then you look at Freeport. Once again, I don't know, I haven't even looked, but I think the market cap might be $3 million of that company.
Yeah.
But it's a massive multi-billion-dollar capex project in Papua New Guinea. Guess what? If you have a bull market, a huge bull market, like that story, Sentient spent $300 million on that thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you could, and once again, I own shares. I've bought them just to full disclosure. But you can wake up and that thing can trade up how many, or by the way, they can go to zero. Let's be clear. And
Yeah.
so, but I love options trading. And so whenever I start to have conviction around a certain, and right now it's copper, I'll find 5 of these.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I will not put out more than can go to zero because I fully, as a retail investor, you should really make sure you appreciate that if you're buying one of these options, it very well may, and probably some of them will go to zero. But you lay those bets, and if you got the macro call right, if I am right about copper, and we have this conversation, one of these 5 will go to the moon. It will easily eclipse any zeros that occur.
Yeah. You just need one of
You
them
just
to
need
work
one.
out.
But you got to get the companies right.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, because they got to make it through. At least 1 or 2 of them have to make it through the theta aspect, the burn, and then the other part of it is you got to get the copper call right.
Yeah.
And in the long run, there's always going to be another bull market. So it's like, is it only a year away or 2 years away, or is it 7? Because if it's 7, all the copper companies that buy are probably zeros because they're going to go bankrupt because there's going to be 2 capital raises between now and then. So that's how I think about it. I know different people, and one of the mistakes I think that some of the management teams try to tell you is they're going to build this mine, they're going to do this. sometimes that's true, but I think being more honest resonates with people and just saying, hey, guess what? Like we have this massive gold deposit or this massive fill in the blank deposit. And if the commodity goes from X to Z,
Hmm.
then this is going to go like this. And that's go look at a chart. Look at what happens in uranium when uranium moves. Let's just look at
Yeah.
all these different commodities.
I really like how uranium is looking on a fundamental, and as a commodity, I think it's the torquiest. Like when it moves hard, and the and stocks move hard and fast as well. Where are you getting your exposure for uranium right now?
Um, yeah, so I sit on Phil Williams' board,
Yeah.
Consolidated Uranium, and I think that's one place. And then I have also have just owned a basket of uranium companies.
Okay, very cool.
And I agree with you. And I would say uranium is also interesting because, you know, it's been a long time between drinks.
Mm,
So like the last real uranium bull market has been
yeah.
a while, and I think the Fukushima overhang is working its way out.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, you have environmentalists, which always should have been the case. It wasn't. You have environmentalists now saying, um, by the way, actually, uranium's not that bad.
Yeah.
I think that like you've had a lot of
Well, like
you've had a lot
sort of
of
like the big talking heads
you
now, like Bill
yeah,
Gates, is
Bill Gates,
always
not Bill
yeah,
Gates. They've come out.
Elon Musk, and like a lot of these guys who are environmentalists or greenies are coming out and saying like this is the best source of green energy. Like
Yeah,
so
and
it's
so
becoming accepted by the mainstream, and then the NIMBY attitude
and I'll tell you something that
is going
I
away.
think is completely misrepresented in Western media everywhere, including London, Toronto, and America. I think in a lot of ways, China is leading the global the world, they're leading the world in environmental policy. You know, the Chinese government has its constituency, the Chinese people. They care what they think. Like it's this whole misnomer no, like the Chinese government follows with great clarity like what its people are thinking. And I think that in China, people are sick of pollution and they don't like it and they want to change.
Hmm.
And same with corruption. And we've seen a huge crackdown in China with corruption. And I think we're seeing the same thing with clean energy. China is building nuclear reactors at a breakneck pace.
Yeah.
And by the way, they are jamming EVs, hydrogen fuel cells, batteries into their people as to help clean up the environment, right? And so I think people don't really appreciate how quickly and how dramatic that transformation is in China. I'm not saying they're perfect, um, but like I just think people underappreciate
Yeah.
how quickly that's happening and how
Underappreciate and underestimate, and
eh,
they've always been. It's always been like I think people like painting them with like a negative brush
it's
for some
totally
reason,
incorrect. I
right?
mean, like
Yeah.
we have Chinese partners, and the Chinese government is really focused on cleaning up the air. Are they going to do it the way you would do it? I don't know, but they're doing it, and that is also meaningful and has an impact on our sector because um, the government of China has gone and they've secured the natural resources to do that. And,
Mhm.
and by the way, Canada could have done it too, and they didn't do it. And so, you go pick up whatever your Canadian or U.S. newspaper is, and they're like bemoaning China. It's like, well, hey, hold on a second, guys.
Yeah.
They didn't do anything wrong. They just went and bought the mine. You could have done the same thing, Canadian government, U.S. government. You didn't do it.
Yeah.
And what I would say is China's done a fantastic job of securing the natural resources to affect that energy transition inside their country, and it's happening. And I think if people don't wake up, and they're not waking up, contrary to like whatever we think, if they don't wake up, then fast forward another 10 or 15 years, and China will be the dominant global leader in green energy technologies
Mm.
in their various forms and applications.
You've a lot of interesting facts and opinions. I think different from our previous guests because, as I said, it was almost you hear what you want to hear. You're going to talk to people who confirm what you want to hear, kind of thing. But a lot of the stuff that you spoke about reinforces some of like what I think the future is going to be. But a lot to think about on the other side of it as well. So, like, I really appreciate what you brought to the table. Um, can you tell us a funny site visit tour story? Do you have anything crazy? Because the craziest things always happen on site visits. So, do you have anything?
Um, I mean, there's lots of flat tires and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. Let me have to think about that. Um, oh, I have one. I was in an emergency helicopter. It wasn't quite a crash, but it
Yeah.
was like almost. We were in Mongolia and we were visiting a fluorspar mine, and where we were, there are these hills in Mongolia, and the wind kind of whips around these valleys. And we came around a valley, and a gust of wind hit this, Soviet era helicopter.
Yeah.
It kind of lost control, and he smashed down into the ground, and it broke.
Black Hawk Down.
Luckily, it wasn't that bad.
Yes.
It broke the landing gear,
Yeah.
and we waited there like 12 hours or something. It felt like forever to bring whatever it was that they needed to do to fix it. So the guys get out there and like, okay, we're ready to go. And I said, you know what? There's no way I'm getting on that helicopter.
Yeah.
So instead of actually flying back off with everyone else, I'm like, I'm gonna miss my flight, and I'm driving. I rode 12 hours ago
Yeah.
because I'm like,
Was it like on the rolling plains of Mongolia, like
uh,
one of those?
yeah, it wasn't. It was where like the mountains come in and they roll, and the wind blows around because
Yeah.
when we were at Firebird, there was a point when we were one of the largest investors in the country.
In Mongolia.
The fund was, yeah, and
Yeah.
so I spent a lot of time there at one point. This has been a long time ago now, but fantastic place, by the way. But yeah, I just remember it just hitting so hard.
Did you think you were gonna die?
No, it happened too quick,
Okay.
actually. It really happened too quick. But well, I do remember sitting there thinking like 12 hours. I want to do this. Like, yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
getting on that helicopter.
Have you been on a helicopter since?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, maybe not a Soviet era.
I think I've
Yeah.
even been on the social media one,
Okay, okay.
but I will say,
Lesson learned.
but,
Okay, in conclusion.
but I will say,
Yeah.
I've never, up to that moment, I never once even thought about getting on a helicopter.
Yeah.
It just didn't. But now every time I'm like, do we really? Can we drive? Do we really?
Was that pre-kids when you were on the crash?
I think I think I actually did have
All right. I'm
one
really
or
like
just.
trying to justify and like help you justify why you're getting a logo.
Well, what? I really I really don't pursue flying a helicopter.
Yeah.
But in these places like in Africa and in certain places in Southeast Asia and Papua New Guinea,
Yeah.
they're just moments like our refinery. There's no road to our refinery.
Yeah.
So what are you gonna do, right?
Well, I
So
can say a cool thing about being in mining is you see parts of a country that no tourist is going to.
yeah.
It's like untouched parts of the land
Yeah,
where, yeah,
I mean, this is one of the great things about having been in this business. I've been to, you know, the Eastern Congo and Rwanda, and we've, been to Inner Mongolia and Mongolia and all over Siberia, and because through time the tape changes for jurisdictions, right? They rise and fall. So Mongolia was so hot, it's not anymore. If I go back even further, Russia was hot, it's not obviously today.
hmm
Africa's in vogue, it's out of vogue, and even Canada, by the way. There's some really cool places in Canada to go see. Like once upon a time, I was on the board of Fission Uranium forever ago,
hmm
and cool site visits. So, as if you stay in the game long enough, as we transition through not only commodity cycles but country cycles, you get an opportunity to see like really cool places where you might not just go there on a holiday, right?
yeah,
So
that's the beautiful side of mining, people. Okay, I
I
think,
thought I thought you were the beautiful side of mine. Come
yeah,
on.
I I stand next to the beautiful side of mining. That's how I'm noticed. But thank you for your time.
Thanks for
I
having
really
me.
appreciate it. It was short notice, so this is
No,
I
I
really
appreciate. I'm always
appreciate it.
happy to come
Yeah.
on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.